Pastor Matt.
So, Pastor Matt, how did you get here?
Man, my wife and I planted a church in North Carolina. About 13, oh my goodness, we've been there for 6 years, so 19 years ago. And started with about 15, 20 people. 13 years later, God just did some amazing things. And we never ever thought that we would leave there. It was in North Carolina. And man, we've always had a heart, a vision to be a part of a multi-ethnic, multicultural church. I grew up in a military home, so I was always around different cultures. And when we moved to North Carolina to plant that church, it was interesting because where we planted, it was just all white. It wasn't. In fact, at first we named the church Family Tabernacle Metropolitan Tabernacle or something like that. So we had to drop the metropolitan part. But there was always something in our hearts that we would be involved in a church that again wasn't all white. It was all ethnicities, and we never saw that happen there in North Carolina. And all of a sudden, we heard about this church. And in fact, they found us and they began talking to us about coming to Memphis. And I knew nothing about Memphis, knew nothing about the history here. And when we began to investigate, look and see what was happening and what this city was about, there was something that just really sparked in us. And then we began talking to the officials of this church, the elders, and to hear them say that it was their dream to be a church that was reaching out to the needs in the neighborhood community. That caught our attention. Back in the 90s, this church made a conscientious decision to stay in this neighborhood when other churches were leaving. They call it the white flight thing. They made a decision to stay because they wanted it to be a church that was reaching the neighborhood. And at the time, this church was about 90% white. And when we came to visit and began looking at the possibility of pastoring this church, I thought, wow, you want to be a church in the neighborhood, and yet it doesn't look like the neighborhood, you know? But yet there was a burning desire with the leadership of this church that it would become that. And so after praying and seeking God, man, we just knew that it was His will for us to come. And 6 years later, I look back, and if I had to do all over again, I'd do it again. Because we have seen God do some amazing things. It's been tough. Anytime you take a church and you fool with the culture of it. And now, I think we're 50-50. I mean, there's just so many different backgrounds. So
Let's talk about that. What have been some of the challenges in transitioning the church from what it was to what it is now, and where you're going?
It's a great question, Ramp, because coming into it, I had no idea. You know, I'd never taken over a church. We planted a church. Been in church all my life, but I've never taken over a church. And so when we came and we heard them say, we want this to be multicultural, multi-ethnic, they didn't even know what that looked like. Because this church has historically been what it's always been. And so, man, we began praying, like, God, what do we do? And this I call him my cousin, Pastor Darnell, Pastor D. We were here probably about a month. He came up to me and he said, hey, man, I want to take you to lunch. And Pastor D took me to the Cozy Corner barbecue place. Yeah, incredible. And he introduced me to everybody as his cousin. And that sparked an amazing relationship between this black brother and me. And he spoke some words of encouragement, telling me that he felt after praying, and been praying for years, that God would do something in the city, that God had sent me to do that. And he wanted to help. And with all sincerity, Rep, I'm like, help me. You know, because I don't know the culture here. I mean, every city has a different culture. So help me. What does that mean? How do we embrace the culture, and really the black culture in this society and this community? So man, one of the first things he did was took us to our foyer, church foyer. And he pointed and he said, everything in this foyer says white. Everything. Pictures, decor. And all of a sudden, man, the light starts going off in my head. Everything about this church said white, sounded white, looked white. And so he challenged me. He said, how many board members you got? I said, 9. He said, are they all white? I said, yeah. He goes, it's never going to change in the congregation until it changes in the boardroom. And he was the first African-American elder to be elected on this church board. About 2 years later, maybe 3 years. So we got intentional, Rev. We really did, man. From the music, you know, you can't listen to the multicultural music at 80 dB. You got to feel it.
Right.
So we pumped it up, and man, that started all kinds of, it's too loud, it's too, but we were intentional, we were very strategic at the same time, but we knew that from the top down, it needed to change, from the leadership down. And so from Pastor D to praying about God sending strategic leaders in our church that would be white and black and Hispanic, and because again, I'll say it again, from the top down it flows. And so it got pretty bad, man. It really did. We had a lot of people leave because, you know, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to experience it. And if all of a sudden us embracing this neighborhood is going to bring the neighborhood, and in order to bring the neighborhood, you want to honor the neighborhood. Not appease, but honor. Honor. There's a difference between tolerating, right, and embracing. We tolerate each other because we have to eat together. We have to go to the stadium together. We have to. But to celebrate our diversity means I'm going to invite you into an environment that I don't have to, which is my home, my church, my birthday party. And so here we promote that. We say we celebrate our diversity. We don't tolerate it. We celebrate it.
And celebrating that diversity, let's talk about the victories. What are some of the victories that has happened since you've been on this trajectory with Raleigh Assembly of God?
The what again?
The victories that
Victories.
have happened since you've been on
Goodness.
this trajectory.
I think the number one victories that we've encountered are it's going to sound bad, are the African American families that will come in and say, I feel at home. I feel at home. I don't see you as white. I don't see you as black. This is home. This is that is music to my ears, because God can do that. There's nothing we can do about the color of our skin. I used to say I don't see that. Well, I do see it.
Right.
Of course you see it. And there's always going to be differences. But when I humble myself and I realize that no matter color, no matter background, I am a sinner saved by grace, so I'm no better than anybody else. And rather than be threatened by your culture or threatened by who you are, I choose to embrace it. I choose to celebrate it. And so when we hear people, not just black, but whites and Hispanic, I had an older white person come to me and say, Pastor, I have to admit to you, for years I've been prejudiced. And started talking about their background and their family and their daddy and their daddy. And yet what they see now is this can work. This can work. When you tear down those preconceived ideas, and I get it, I really do, man. I hope I'm not rambling, Rev, but I get it. I was raised in a family, in a home that celebrated diversity. Again, military family. That's how I was raised. And so it's natural for me. I feel awkward when it's all white. I've always been like that. But that's the way I was raised. Well, you got some that were raised with nothing but black and black background, and you got some that was raised with nothing but white. And so those people, they were raised that way. That's the way they were raised from a child. And so it's hard for them to just let that go because they've heard what happened all those years. Not demeaning it, not making light of it, but that's just what they've heard. And so taking that mindset and not making light of it and not saying it didn't happen, but saying, okay, we're sorry, I'm sorry, you're sorry. How about today and tomorrow? How about today and tomorrow?
Two quick questions I want to get to because it looks like we might be losing a little battery here. What impact do you want to see this church have in this community?
I want to alleviate human suffering in any way, shape, or form. I want to alleviate human suffering. If there are people